This is Brother Peter Diamond, vaticancatholic.com. I want to talk about the Great Western Schism and the gates of hell. The Great Western Schism, which took place between 1378 and 1417, was a period of church history which featured massive confusion, multiple antipopes, an antipope in Rome, and an antipope recognized by all of the cardinals. This is an extremely important period of church history. In order to understand what Christ meant by his promise, the gates of hell will not prevail against his church, and what that does not preclude, it's critical for those who profess to be Catholics to understand this period of church history. I'm now going to discuss it in detail. For some of the references to the quotes I give, see our article on this topic. The conclave in the Vatican, 1378, after Pope Gregory XI's death, was the first to meet in Rome since 1303. The popes had resided in Avignon for approximately 70 years due to political turmoil. The conclave was held amid scenes of unprecedented uproar. Since France had become the home of the popes for the last 70 years, the Roman mob surrounding the conclave was quite unruly and clamored for the cardinals to elect a Roman, or at least an Italian. At one point, when it was believed that a Frenchman had been elected instead of an Italian, the mob stormed the palace. Quote, "In a fury, the mob now began throwing stones at the windows of the palace and attacking the doors with picks and axes. There was no effective defending force. The crowd stormed in." End quote. Eventually, an Italian, Pope Urban VI, was elected by 16 cardinals. The new pope asked the cardinals if they had elected him freely and canonically. They said they had. Shortly after the election, the 16 cardinals who had elected Urban VI wrote to the 6 cardinals who had remained stubbornly at Avignon. Quote, "We have given our votes for Bartolomeo, the Archbishop of Bari, Urban VI, who is conspicuous for his great merits, and whose manifold virtues make him a shining example. We have in full agreement elevated him to the summit of apostolic excellence, and have announced our choice to the multitude of Christians." End quote. The cardinals reject Pope Urban VI under the pretext of the unruly Roman mob. Shortly after his election, however, Pope Urban VI began to alienate the cardinals. Quote, "The French cardinals, who formed the majority in the Sacred College, were dissatisfied with the city and wished to return to Avignon in France, where there were no dilapidated basilicas and ruined palaces, no tumultuous Roman mobs and deadly Roman fevers, where life was, in a word, more comfortable. Urban VI refused to leave Rome, and his stern resolve, intimated to them in no mincing words, to reform the papal court and break down the luxury of its life, gave deep offense to the cardinals." End quote. One by one, the cardinals went to Anagni in France to vacation. Quote, "The new pope, suspecting nothing, had given them permission to go there for the summer. In mid-July, they agreed among themselves that the April election had been invalid due to duress by the surrounding mob, and that, using this as a reason, they would withdraw recognition from Urban VI." End quote. After the news of the cardinals' decision to repudiate Urban VI had been circulated, the canonist Baldus, considered the most famous jurist of the day, published a treatise disagreeing with their decision. In it he stated, quote, "There were no grounds on which the cardinals could repudiate a pope once they had elected him, and none on which the Church as a whole could depose him, except persistent and open heresy." End quote. Despite the imprecision in this statement by Baldus, for a true pope can never be deposed, a heretic deposes himself, we can clearly see in his words the commonly acknowledged truth that a claimant to the papacy who is openly and persistently heretical can be rejected as a non-pope, since he is outside the Church. All of the living cardinals reject Pope Urban VI and recognize an antipope. On July 20th, 1378, 15 of the 16 cardinals who had elected Pope Urban VI withdrew from his obedience on the grounds that the unruly Roman mob had made the election uncanonical. The one cardinal who did not repudiate Pope Urban VI was Cardinal Tebaldeschi, but he died shortly thereafter on September 7th, leaving a situation where not one of the cardinals of the Catholic Church recognized the true pope, Urban VI. All of the living cardinals now regarded his election as invalid. After repudiating Urban VI, on September 20, 1378, the cardinals proceeded to elect Clement VII as, quote, pope, who set up his rival papacy in Avignon. The great schism of the West had begun. Quote, the rebel cardinals then wrote to the European courts explaining their action. Charles V of France and the whole French nation immediately acknowledged Clement VII, as did also Flanders, Spain, and Scotland, the Empire and England, with the northern and eastern nations and most of the Italian republics, adhered to Urban VI. End quote. Even though the validity of the election of Pope Urban VI was ascertainable, one can see why many were taken in by the argument that the Roman mob had unlawfully influenced his election, thereby rendering it uncanonical. Moreover, one can see how the position of anti-Pope Clement VII was strengthened considerably and imposingly in the eyes of many by the fact that 15 out of the 16 cardinals who had elected Urban VI came to repudiate his election as invalid. The situation that resulted after anti-Pope Clement VII's acceptance by the cardinals was a nightmare from the very beginning, a nightmare which shows us how bad and confusing God will sometimes allow things to get without violating the essential promises he made to his church. Quote, the schism was now an accomplished fact, and for 40 years Christendom was treated with the melancholy spectacle of 2 and even 3 rival popes claiming its allegiance. It was the most perilous crisis through which the Church had ever passed. Both popes declared a crusade against each other. Each of the popes claimed the right to create cardinals and to confirm archbishops, bishops, and abbots, so that there were 2 colleges of cardinals, and in many places 2 claimants for the high positions in the Church. Each pope attempted to collect all the ecclesiastical revenues, and each excommunicated the other. End quote. The spectacle continued as popes and anti-popes alike died, only to be succeeded by more. Pope Urban VI died in 1389, and was succeeded by Pope Boniface IX, who reigned from 1389 to 1404. After Boniface IX's election, he was promptly excommunicated by anti-Pope Clement VII, and he responded by excommunicating him. During his reign, Pope Boniface IX, quote, was unable to enlarge his sphere of influence in Europe. Sicily and Genoa actually fell away from him. Cardinals of both camps take an oath to work to end the schism prior to participating in new elections, which demonstrates how bad the situation had become. Meanwhile, at Avignon, anti-Pope Clement VII died in 1394. Before electing anti-Pope Clement VII's successor, all 21 cardinals, quote, swore to work for the elimination of the schism, each undertaking, if elected, to abdicate if and when the majority judged it proper. End quote. Keep this in mind, as it will become relevant when we cover why a third claimant to the papacy came into the picture. The cardinals at Avignon proceeded to elect Pedro de Luna, anti-Pope Benedict XIII, to succeed anti-Pope Clement VII. Benedict XIII reigned as the Avignon claimant for the rest of the schism. For some time, Benedict XIII had in his support none other than the miracle-working Dominican, St. Vincent Ferrer. St. Vincent actually served as his confessor for a time, believing the Avignon line to be the valid line, until sometime later on in the schism. St. Vincent had obviously been persuaded that Pope Urban VI's election was invalid, due to the unruly Roman mob, in addition to the formidable acceptance of the Avignon line by 15 out of the 16 cardinals who had taken part in Urban VI's election.